Land Use Committee. I look back there, it looks like it's, 5 o'clock. We're going to get started. So we have a call of order. We thank you all for being here tonight. We have some public comment we'll get to first, and then we'll go through our committee business on the agenda. So the first, the meeting's called to order, and our first bit of business is the public comment. We have one individual, Sally McLean, on Zoom, and we'll bring her on first. Is she there?
I don't see that Sally has logged in yet.
Okay, so we'll wait.
Chair Dobie, I know that she specifically wants to comment on the school impact fees.
Right,
So
which
if
would be now.
If she's not on as a result of technical difficulty, could we save her for later? Is that okay?
She just logged in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, is she logged in now? Okay, I'm gonna bring on Sally McLean, who would like to talk about school impact fees. Sally, are you there?
I am. Good evening, council members and council member Dobie. My name is Sally McLean, and I'm here this evening on behalf of Dr. Danny Pfeiffer, Superintendent, to share comments related to school impact fees, which I do know is on your agenda this evening. And with your permission, I would like to defer my comments until the conclusion of that presentation, if that is an option. And if not, I'll proceed.
Well, let's think about that. We have a couple people who want to comment about it, and we usually have a comment before we get to the agenda items. Is there a,
I think it's up to you, Chair.
it's up to me? Well, okay, so why don't we do this? If Sally wants to move to theirs, is it all right with the individuals who want to comment on impact fees to be at the same time? Okay, so we'll make an exception, and we'll have the other individuals who are here for impact fees that have put forward to talk at the same time. Okay, Sally, you say, hang tight until we get to item D.
Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Now we'll go to Trent Mummery, who would like to speak about item E.
Thank you, council members and staff. My name is Trent Mummery. I'm a principal at Trent Development, and I'm here to speak about the TC3 agenda item, which is agenda number E, or agenda letter E. We're grateful to have been selected as the finalist for this great project. We're very excited to be working with all of you and with the city and on this catalyst to revitalize that property for the entire area. We've got a lot of experience in the development world up and down the I-5 corridor. We've got a large number of projects underway, and we're very excited to be able to get selected and work in federal way, particularly with the transit-oriented development that's going to be happening in this area. That's an area of our expertise. We have reviewed the letter of intent to award and we have signed it and brought it with us tonight. And we look forward to working with all of you. And we appreciate your support and ask for your support in the final vote for this measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Is there any other public comment out there other than the ones I have here for Sally McLean and Ian Morrison? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to committee business. Any council member have anything to bring up? No? Okay, we'll move to item A, approval of the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes of the March 6th meeting.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Item B, resolution intent to renew the Steel Lake Management District SLMD number 1 and setting of a public hearing date for June 6. There you are.
Just pull this. Wait, one second. Do you know which one is this? Yeah, let's see. Oh, chamber. Okay.
2023.
Okay.
LETC.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. So hopefully you all can see that online. So my name's Dan Sternkoff. I'm a pollution control specialist with Public Works, and I'm basically going to be presenting about this intent to reform the Steel Lake Management District. And okay, here we go. So the policy question essentially is, should City Council approve this resolution and set a related public hearing date for the June 6th regular City Council meeting? So just getting into it, what is a lake management district as defined by the RCW? A lake management district is essentially a special service district that can collect assessments and use those funds for specified lake management activities. And there's a lot of different benefits for lake management districts. They create structures for taking proactive action on the lake. They establish property owner representation. They develop a communication network, funding mechanism, like I mentioned, and also, maybe most importantly, is they prevent the spread of invasive aquatic weeds. And so the current status, the LMD was renewed last in 2014, and the duration is for 10 years, so it'll end at the end of this year. And the primary purposes, like I mentioned, aquatic vegetation management, public education, water quality monitoring, and water quality monitoring there. So the Steel Lake Advisory Committee, it's made up of 6 members currently. There's 4 residential property owners, 1 representative from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and 1 representative, a non-voting representative from the City Parks Department. And there's also staff support like me who does meeting coordination, budget updates, and as well as other things, water quality monitoring. And so, yeah, basically this is kind of what the heart of the presentation will be. This new renewal will take it through the end of 2033, and I'll get into these in more detail. So the main purpose, one of the main purposes is aquatic vegetation management. That consists of plant surveys, treatment and control, and herbicide monitoring. There's also a public education component. There's a webpage where public information is posted, annual reports, there's newsletters, things like that. And then as far as water quality monitoring, city staff from Public Works go out and collect samples. King County Environmental Lab does the analysis. And then we also work on tracking and reporting the water quality data that was collected. So it's essentially just trying to get a baseline of data to try and identify potential water quality problems down the line. This graph on the right here is what is known as a trophic state index. It's essentially an EPA-approved method that measures the health of bodies of water. It measures the total weight of body mass in water. And anything below 40 is generally considered a healthy lake. And as you can see, most of the trend lines are right around there. So this would be considered a healthy lake, Steel Lake. So the boundary includes all lakefront properties and properties with deeded lake access, and it also goes for 10 years. So I'll give you all a chance to look this over for a second. This is the proposed rate structure. It just shows how much is charged to develop properties, vacant properties, city parks, and the boat launch, as well as the multifamily zoning. And so as far as the petition sufficiency, we were able to collect 27 signatures, which exceeds the requirements highlighted in the RCW there. And I could just give you all a moment to look over the next steps. So yeah, basically, instead of reading them, yeah, you all could just look through those real quick. Yeah, so lastly, the options considered would be to approve this resolution and set a public hearing date, or to not approve and provide staff direction. And so the mayor's recommendation would be to move forward with option 1, to approve it for the upcoming council meeting. And I believe that's all. So yeah, if you all have any questions.
Council, any questions? Yes, Council President Kulchmar.
I was just going to joke around a little bit. So when you say reform the Steel Lake Management District, we're not really going into a reformation of the verbiage. We're actually just reinstituting the same with maybe some updates.
Yeah, exactly.
I
yeah,
was
it's-
looking at reform and I thought, why are we reforming?
Yeah, I think it's kind of just the language from the RCW, but yeah, this would be the second time that it was first formed in 2004, so this would be the second time. Yeah, no problem.
Good.
Just a quick question. Going back to the fees page,
Yeah. This one?
yeah, are those annual fees or?
Yeah, they're collected annually. The billing's done by King County, and, so it's, each year this would be generated.
Okay, and that, and what's collected goes specifically towards the maintenance and control of?
Yeah, they have their own account and everything, and yeah, all the funds only go to lake management
Okay.
activities.
All right, thank you.
I do have one question about the fees. We have 9 vacant lots.
Yeah.
Why are they charged less than the ones that have a building on them?
That's a good question. I'm actually not sure. It might be something to do with the RCW, but I could look into that and try and gather a better answer on that.
So that has to do with the use of the property.
It has to do with
So
use?
Dan's right, it is established by the RCW, but basically, if it's a vacant property, there's an assumption that they're not applying fertilizer to a lawn and not contributing to the lake, you know, the pesticides and everything else that's kind of the intent of the LMD to resolve. So they still contribute, but it's an undeveloped property, so it's a more natural state. So they get a credit for that.
The reason I asked the question is some of those properties are backed up front to back, and so although they may be vacant, they may actually, but that's an RCW by the
Correct.
state.
Yes, the exact dollars is up to the LMD members themselves, but the differentiation between the two is.
Okay. Okay, do I have a motion?
Oh, I have a question.
Oh, Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. These are only properties that pay into it that are right on the lake, is that correct?
And also, if they have deeded lake access too, they would also pay in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and Councilmember Ron?
I'm ready to make the motion.
Okay,
Mr. Chair, I move to forward the proposed resolution to the April 18, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I second the motion.
okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you all.
Okay, we're going to move to item C, Pollution Prevention Assistant Partnership Authorization to apply for interagency agreement.
Hi there. Hi, council members. My name is Kevin Dew. I'm the water quality program supervisor with Public Works Environmental Services Division. I'm here to talk about the Pollution Prevention Assistant Partnership with Ecology and asking authorization to apply. So the policy question here today is, should City Council authorize Public Works to apply for the 2023-2025 Pollution Prevention Assistance Partnership and if awarded, enter into an interagency agreement with Ecology? So what is the PPA partnership? Well, it's a program that began in 2007, and the purpose is to prevent potential pollution from by being proactive and providing technical assistance to our businesses that generate hazardous waste. And the businesses that qualify, and what we're going to be focusing on will be small quantity generators. And so here are the different types of waste generating types. And so we'll be focusing on small quantity generators which produce 220 pounds or less of hazardous waste or 2.2 pounds or less of highly toxic waste per month. And so types of hazardous waste would be like motor oil, kitchen grease, batteries, anything that says poison, hazardous, or flammable would be considered hazardous waste. And so some businesses that would be considered to be applicable for this site visits would be restaurants, cafes, automotive places, dry cleaning, commercial dry cleaning, and businesses of the sort. So the type of technical assistance we would provide through this partnership is that we would review spill prevention plans and practices and help them develop a plan if they don't have any. We provide best management practices that to help protect our stormwater, such as providing secondary containment or a spill kit. And we've also explained the hazardous waste regulations that revolve around this specific business and help them find a place to dispose or recycle that hazardous waste. And then we will also promote Ecology's product replacement program, which is a voucher program where businesses can apply and replace their toxic product or substance for a less toxic version. And so while we apply, well, Ecology would reimburse us for all of our activities, materials, and staff time dedicated to this program. And based on our potential deliverables, I'm guessing a compensation of about $50,000 to $100,000. And secondly, we're already required to do similar site visits through our municipal stormwater permit, or MPDES permit. And so site visits that are pertaining to this partnership will also apply to that program, which helps us fulfill our program requirements. And then we will proactively, provide outreach for our businesses here in Federal Way to help them reduce hazardous waste from entering our environment and our waterways, making this Federal Way a little bit safer and cleaner for all our residents here. And so the options considered are, should we approve the proposed authorization to apply for this partnership with Ecology, or should we not, and provide additional direction to staff? The mayor recommends forwarding option 1. Any questions?
Council, any questions? Okay, seeing none, can I have is there a motion?
I move to forward the proposed authorization to apply for the Pollution Prevention Assistant Partnership and enter into the resulting interagency agreement with Ecology to the April 18, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, we're about to move to item D, ordinance for housing action plan implementation code amendments. And I think this would be the time we'd have our public comment before the presentation. And we have 3 people that are going to testify. So we'll start with Sally, who is holding on the phone through the internet. Sally, would you have 3 minutes, and we'd like to hear from you.
Okay. Again, good evening, council members. I'm sorry my screen goes dark, so I can no longer see you as I'm talking. But I am looking forward to seeing you in person on April 18th. I'm here to share comments regarding the city's proposed changes to school impact fees with our shared goal of generating more predictability for developers. The district also has a goal to ensure that any changes to school impact fees consider the context of sharing the burden of the costs of new school capacity created by development between developers and our shared taxpayers. Federal Way Public Schools has a long history, more than 20 years, of partnering with city staff and council members to adjust and align school impact fees. So this isn't the first time we've had this opportunity to partner, and I've appreciated the opportunity to work with Keith Nevin and Cheney Caston since the end of February. So some of the things that we've done in the past were to modify our the cost of new capacity fee. You might remember your former chief Ewan, who worked with us to develop a different model for identifying proportionate costs to new capacity. The district has been supportive of reducing school impact fees by 50% in the downtown core. I know that's under consideration now for modification. The council has agreed both with upward mid-year adjustments and downward mid-year adjustments based on extraordinary circumstances that were occurring within the district. But, and I know later on this evening, you'll hear the full presentation. So I hope these comments are within context. So again, we do support the concept of a more predictable school impact fee, and we generally support the ordinance as proposed with one exception. The missing element for the district at this point is any protection or recognition for extraordinary impacts on enrollment due to development. This was generally discussed during our conversations as those instances where a student generation rate is greater than 1 student per unit of new housing. At one time, the draft ordinance language contained language that would allow the city council to impose a fee greater than the proposed cap, but never more than the actual district calculated fee. This concept is currently missing from the proposed ordinance and is of significant concern to us. We respectfully request that the Land Use and Transportation Committee refer this ordinance back to city staff so we can continue our collaboration and find a solution to address cases of extraordinary impacts from new development in a manner that will, one, still meet the city council's desire and our desire for more predictability in school impact fees, and two, also protect our shared taxpayers from bearing a disproportionate amount of the cost of providing new classrooms. Thank you for your time, and again, I'll be available through the rest of the evening to answer any questions if appropriate.
Thank you, Sally. We have Ian Morrison. If you could come to the stand and tell us where you live, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, council members. Ian Morrison for the record. I'm a land use attorney with McCullough Hill, 701 Fifth Avenue, Suite 6600 in Seattle, Washington. I am here on behalf of Mill Creek Residential and Intercorp, who you received letters in regard to the school impact fees. And first, I would like to say thank you to the council for the work and staff that you have been doing on the housing action plan and the updates to encourage residential development throughout the city. I can speak for the both Mill Creek and Intercorp that they support and appreciate the work that the council and staff are doing there. I also appreciate the comments of our colleague from the school district here. And while I don't maybe agree with everything she said, I agree with one key takeaway, which is we think there is some more work to be done with staff in providing the predictability and encouraging the type of housing production that this whole effort has been working for. As you understand, the development community desires predictability in planning for future housing. And as school impact fees typically are not paid until the time of building permit issuance, while the entitlement process or the process 3 can follow or precede that by a year or more, the decisions are being made right now by developers like Intercorp and Mill Creek on whether to proceed with these projects. And while we understand the intent of the code amendment was to try to provide some predictability on the maximum fee cap, the current language, as you look at as an underwriter, as a developer, they have to sort of still assume that it could go up at a mid-year or some other thing up to that cap. So it kind of defeats, in our mind, the purpose of what Heartland and the council and staff were trying to do of provide predictability. You saw in those letters that there's some language that we believe from the development community would provide a predictable on-ramp. One option may be providing that the school impact fees are set as of time of the participation or the start of your land use permit, which again sort of gives certainty to the development community that those fees are set. It also gives predictability to the school district of what might be coming in the pipeline. We think that the type of work that staff and Heartland have been doing to try to create that housing impact plan and find some reforms for residential development is the right way. It just requires a little bit more time. So I would second what my colleague from the council or the school district said, which is we would encourage the council to bring this back to staff for a little bit more refinement to find a solution that works for the development community, for the city, and also for the school district. We appreciate your time. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Clifford Cothard.
Yes, Cawthon. It is very anglicized, so thank you for trying.
You write like I do, you know, it's hard to read.
I know, right?
Yes.
So my name is Clifford Cawthon. I'm the Advocacy and Policy Manager for Habitat for Humanity, Seattle, King, Kittitas counties. We're located in Renton, so right up the I-167, and we've been serving Seattle, King County area for the last 37 years, and we are happy to partner with community to build affordable, permanently affordable home ownership opportunities. And I'm here tonight in support of the proposed ordinance. And I just want to say, first of all, thank you to staff for their input on this. Thank you to Heartland and also your work wanting to eliminate barriers to develop housing, especially during this housing shortage. However, in this proposed ordinance, we would suggest tweaking one part of it, a recommendation to remove some inclusionary requirements. So as an affordable housing developer, inclusionary zoning requirements have been shown to create affordable units in other cities. We see the need to make sure that those requirements are there so those units can be built. And we would, in fact, encourage you to look at those similar tools in order to be able to build the kind of affordable units along with those market rate units, because if we have mixed income communities, tide can lift all boats. So we are definitely ready to partner with City of Federal Way. It wouldn't be a first time, and we certainly hope it wouldn't be a last in terms of identifying some of those different tools that we can use to create both affordable housing and overall address the housing shortage that our region faces. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment on this? Seeing none, we will move to the presentation. Mr. Lewis?
And while I'm pulling this up, there will be a chance to provide clarification on and answer some of those or address some of those comments specifically at the end. So, share the screen. Good evening, Committee Chair Dovey, Council Members Tran and Walsh, Council President Kochmar, Deputy Mayor Honda, and any other council members who are present online or elsewhere. One of the things that we found through the Housing Action Plan was that housing production in Federal Way has not kept pace with demand or with our forecasted housing need. We committed ourselves to identify why that was and what actions can be taken to address it, particularly in our city center core, and city center frame zones. In our community business zones, our BC zone. Those three zones contain most of the city's housing capacity and also allow for the highest density in the city. Heartland LLC was the consultant hired to study this issue and provide recommendations, and they presented to you back in the February 6th LUTC meeting. So the proposed ordinance before you would move forward on 4 of the 9 Heartland recommendations that were presented for overcoming barriers to housing production, particularly in those 3 zones, the city center core, and community business, or BC zones. It is worth noting that the adoption of code updates to overcome barriers to housing production in Federal Way is one of the required deliverables of a commerce grant that is helping to fund the implementation of our Housing Action Plan, and I think the deadline for that is this June for that deliverable. So, the policy question is whether City Council should adopt amendments to Title 19 of Federal Way Revised Code that are responsive to the study conducted by Heartland LLC as part of the implementation of the Housing Action Plan. And the objective is to be responsive to recommendations of the Heartland LLC study, specifically for reducing barriers to housing in those 3 zones, CC, CCF, and the BC zone. So before going through the 4 amendments that are in the ordinance, there were 9 recommendations, so I just want to speak to the 5 that are not included in the ordinance. The first was to expand the multifamily tax exemption to the community business or BC zone. Right now, that exemption applies to the CC and CCF zones. So that's simply not included in this ordinance because this is just amending Title 19 zoning code. So that would have to come to you as a separate ordinance amending Title 3, which is the finance title of our code. The third one was to increase building height within 100 feet of the single-family zones for the BC zone specifically. So right now there is a 30-foot height limit that applies within 100 feet of single-family zones. So that needs more study, and staff will take a closer look at that issue as part of our periodic comprehensive plan update that will be completed by the end of 2024. So there'll be more weighing and looking at the pros and cons of that particular recommendation in the next year. Number 4 was to reduce the parking requirement for the BC zone. So the code already allows, when we have a development application come in, any applicant can provide their own parking study if they'd like. And if they can show that the required parking, that the parking need can be met for the use that they're proposing in a way that differs from our parking requirements. So they can show that through a professionally done parking study. And because we have that parking study already, we haven't included that in this ordinance. Number 5 was to make consistent the open space requirement and allow for a fee in lieu of option, so a fee in lieu of providing open space. So that ordinance is coming later, probably by June. We were already working on a open space ordinance related to single family, and then these recommendations came along, and we just have lumped it into a larger open space ordinance that will come to LUTC in a couple of months. And number 6 was to allow stormwater to be placed in vaults within the BC zone, since currently they can only be placed in vaults in CC and CCF. And that would require an amendment to the public works standards. So that would also have to come to you as a separate ordinance outside of this ordinance, which is just amending Title 19. So those are the recommendations from Heartland that are not included in the ordinance. So now let's go to the ones in green, the 4 that are included. So the first was to reduce the amount of retail and commercial space that's required, specifically ground floor retail and commercial that's required for multifamily projects in CC, CCF, and the BC zones, and to provide clarifications to the wording. So the ordinance does both of those things. It reduces the amount of ground floor retail and commercial space that's required for the BC and CCF zones, it's a reduction from 60 to 40%, and in the CC, just the city center core zone, it's a reduction from 100% to 25%. And then there's also significant cleanup of the language, since as currently worded in our code, that ground floor retail requirement is very hard to interpret, both for staff and for applicants. So that's been cleaned up in the ordinance. The next was regarding the school impact fee, and there's a few slides on this. So the Heartland recommendation was for more reasonable and predictable school impact fees. The more substantive changes involve a cap on the school impact fee with an annual escalator and a deletion of a 50% discount for the school impact fee that's currently allowed in the CC zone. So specifically, the initial school impact fee would be capped at $4,314 for single family and $6,315 for multifamily. And then the school impact fee could be increased no more than an annual escalator that's based on the Engineering News Record Seattle Area Construction Cost Index. So essentially just keeping pace with the rate of construction inflation.
So I got a question. Right now, we're at 0. And you're proposing we bring it up to 4,314 and 6,315?
That's a cap.
But we're at 0.
Yes.
So you're recommending that we go from 0 to these numbers?
So currently it is set at 0, but there is no cap. So what we're recommending is that the cap gets set to 4,000 and 6,000 specifically, but no recommendation to the actual fee number at the moment.
And how many years out?
Would it remain at 0? Is that the question?
Well, it's 0 until we vote, which is 0.
And so it's reviewed annually, and as currently set up in the draft ordinance, and this is true at the moment as well, the school district provides us their calculations annually.
Right.
At the moment, as you guys are aware, the calculation equals 0.
It's 0.
The proposal going forward, at least in the draft language, is that whatever the school district's recommendation is, we cannot set whatever that number is. If it's 10,000, if it's 1,000, it's the lower essentially of their recommendation or the cap going forward. So if they recommended 1,000 for next year, that would be the max that you guys could adopt.
Unless we say 0.
Correct. Yes. Yes, that's exactly right.
Because we haven't had any development at all because we've been out of line for the last how many years? Okay.
And the draft ordinance does explicitly retain and state more clearly than it used to that it is the council's discretion to vary down from whatever that cap or their recommendation number is.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Before this goes to council, if that's what the committee moves it on to council or back to staff, Could we get a list of all of the districts in Tacoma, in King County and North Pierce County of their school impact fees? Thank you.
See, I'll just one more thing. The reason that this is, to me, very, very critical, we're about to enter into an agreement with a developer to do downtown development of 600, 700 locations. And now we're talking about putting a cap in when we were zero for a whole year, and maybe the intention of, at least my intention as a council member, is to go for that for a long period of time, so we get the development, and this now opens the door for a number that is higher than what we're at right now.
The cap provides the predictability so that developers know that that cannot be increased more than that escalator, so a pretty steady rate over time.
Okay. Well, I'll let you continue. Thank you.
Sorry, just one more comment, Evan, before you continue. To be clear, the council's discretion to set the number at 0 remains with the new ordinance as proposed.
Right, but when you put a number in there, I understand you have to put a number in there for predictability, but you also have to put a year, how long that predictability is. Is it for 10 years? Is it for 15 years? You can't just put a number in there and say this is the predictable number and nobody can plan, because there's no time for that number. That's the way I look at it. You can't just put a number there and say, you gotta, in my opinion, you gotta time it with years also, if there's a number. Councilmember Walsh.
Yeah, along with what Deputy Mayor Honda was saying, that, getting some information on what the school impact fees are for other districts in the area. Also, it'd be interesting to find out what kind of caps cities have on those impact fees. I think it would be good information to have.
We will provide that information.
Okay.
No.
You're back.
This is great. So lastly, on the school impact fee, so there is currently a 50% discount on that school impact fee just for the city center core zone. So this ordinance would repeal that. That was adopted in 2014 in a different time, kind of a different planning context at that time that may have made sense in 2014. And at that time, there were different growth forecasts regarding the potential for the number of school-aged children associated with development in the city center zone. So given the fact that there's now going to be a cap put in place with a very steady, more predictable annual escalator, staff's proposal in the ordinance was to remove that discount that's provided for the CC zone. As we'll get to at the end, you'll see that there was a recommendation from Planning Commission that was to keep that. So that's actually referenced later on. So third was a recommendation regarding the inclusionary requirement for affordable housing. So this ordinance does retain the affordable housing requirement. It's 5%. And there's currently, so in looking at incentives that can be offered, because typically when you have an affordable housing requirement, there's often an incentive, and usually it's like a density bonus. Our BC, CCF, and CC zones don't have a density requirement, so there's really no ability to provide that incentive. So this ordinance provides that incentive through parking. So for those specific units, which is a fairly small number relative to as far as the minimum number of affordable units, there's no parking requirement. So that is the incentive that's added that addresses that Heartland recommendation for the affordable housing requirement. So lastly, there was a recommendation regarding the building design, specifically to get rid of the gabled and pitched roof requirement that's currently in our code. And that just doesn't make sense in the context of higher density development for multifamily that you see typically downtown. And so that's probably the simplest change. It just strikes that requirement for gable and pitch roofs for those zones. So the criteria for development regulations, that's addressed in more detail in the staff report in terms of how this ordinance is consistent with the comprehensive plan, bears a substantial relationship to public health, safety, and welfare, and that it's in the best interests of the residents of Federal Way. So the Planning Commission had a hearing on March 15th, and their recommendation was consistent with the provisions of Federal Way Revised Code 1980-240. The Planning Commission recommended approval of the proposed code amendments, incorporating additional clarifications to the proposed revisions relating to ground floor non-residential requirements and increasing predictability for the school district while preserving the city center incentives. So there's kind of three additions that the Planning Commission recommendation made on top of the ordinance that's actually included for recommendation. One was additional clarifications to the proposed revisions relating to ground floor non-residential requirements. And based on that Planning Commission recommendation, those were incorporated into the ordinance to provide additional clarification on the ground floor requirements. The other two, the increased predictability for the school district, so that one, there was no change made based on that Planning Commission recommendation, since it was viewed that the predictability is that there's a cap and that it can only go up by that annual escalator amount, and that's a predictability both for developers and for the school district in terms of the school impact fee. And then the other one was keeping the city center incentive, so keeping that 50% discount for the city center, and that was also not carried forward to the ordinance. So just noting there is a difference between the Planning Commission recommendation and the recommendation. The actual mayor's recommendation, which is to approve option 1, approve the proposed code changes. So the proposed code changes do not fully incorporate the Planning Commission's recommendation. Before going to questions, I'll also note that while it's not required that we have 2 public hearings on this ordinance, we have committed ourselves, and we've already planned with the hearing notice out and everything, that the first reading of council, if this is forwarded on to the April 18th meeting, that would be a public hearing as well. So it would be a joint first reading public hearing at that council meeting.
And just to clarify the reasoning for that, for the committee, the reason we're holding an additional public hearing is because the version of the school impact fee edits that was reviewed by the Planning Commission at the initial public hearing is so substantially different from the version you're seeing now that we need to hold a new public hearing on the new language.
Any questions?
Councilmember Walsh.
Okay, could you go back on the ground floor requirements and the differences in the different zonings? I think it was reduced from 60 to 40% in
60 from 60% to 40% for the BC zone and the city center frame zone.
Okay, and then in the, and put it as
in the city center core zone, the requirement is, I believe it's for all the ground floor to be retail or commercial of some type. I can flip over that exact wording, but it was reduced to 25% of the ground floor space. So
it seems strange to me that it would be reduced to 25% in city center core, but it's 40% in the, it doesn't seem like it would be a lesser percentage in city center core than what it would be in city center frame and the BC zone.
So for city center core, there's an additional complexity that's been added for a city center core. It's gone from 100% to 25, but there's also been language added that requires the ground floor space for a distance of 50 feet from any portion of the property that adjoins a street intersection to be limited only to entertainment or retail uses. So it's gone from 100% commercial to 25% overall, plus a specific requirement on corners, essentially, where there are street intersections that requires more commercial next to that street intersection.
I think I got that.
Could you repeat what the uses were?
Sure. So for any property, if any portion of the property is located adjacent to the intersection of multiple streets, so for a four-cornered property, that would be four corners that would be adjacent to the intersection. The ground floor space for a distance of 50 feet from the intersection in all directions is limited to only entertainment or retail uses. Entertainment is a broad category that includes a lot of things like restaurants and those sorts of things that you might not classically think of as a quote-unquote entertainment use, but that's included in entertainment.
Like a coffee shop?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
I guess, can you go back to your chart on the fee structures? I'm sorry. So I really believe this is the wrong time to even bring this up and put it into our code, unless there's some reason we have to pick a number right now. Because we are basically telling everybody in King County and the state of Washington that we're not open for development. And to me, an approach would be something like this. For the next 5 to 7 years, we're 0. And then after that, here's the stair step to go up as needed. Because we've been outbuilt and outperformed, and everybody around us, Auburn, Kent, Renton, they all got development while we sat here and languished with a piece of property and got nothing. And now we're ready to say, oh, we're going to lower our prices from 22,000 to 0 and go back to 4 and tell everybody else we're not open for business. I mean, that's just dumb, in my opinion, poor policy making. And we need to give predictability to the developers who want to invest in our community that we're going to be open for business for a period of time, not just every year we're going to change based on what the school district asks. I mean, quite honestly, I think this is the wrong approach. We just went through it trying to get things going. We're trying to get TC3 developed. And now we're going to tell the developers who we signed a deal with, we're going to charge them $2.8 million potentially for school impact fees that we didn't have before. I mean, I think, unless I'm wrong, I think this is just really a bad policy to start with.
Yeah, so a couple things. I just want to be clear that this is, the council, to Kent's point, you have the discretion every year to set the fees where you think it is appropriate. The proposal is not to raise the fees. I think, just to be clear, we're not proposing to raise the fees. It's if the proposal from the district it's provide the predictability of increasing it year over year. You're saying keep it 0 for 5 years. We're saying we're doing the stair step is what we're proposing.
So where's the stair step?
What he was talking about is the percentage and then the flat rate, both.
Well, percent of 0 is 0. So where's the
Yeah.
stair step? Where do you start?
Yes, so percentage from, if there is an amount, to your point, 0 is 0, but if there's, we're making code for long-term, we're not making it for just right now. So that's where we're coming from, is it provides in our minds, a cap, a predictable cap for increases over year. Secondly, which we'll get into the next agenda item with our developer, we're going to talk about awarding a letter of intent to enter into a development agreement which could be negotiated to whatever, if you want to say whatever fees for amount of time, that's in a development agreement that could be open to your discretion, but that's another matter. There's flexibility there, I guess is my point.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. So both the school district and the attorney here for 2 developers have asked for this to go back to staff for more work. What is staff's opinion about that?
So I think there's the difficulty, I think there's kind of a degree of changes. So there's a certain degree of changes where it can be done, I think, without having to go back to taking it back to Planning Commission and taking it perhaps back to, there is time to take it back to LUTC. The difficulty would be anything that might trigger taking it back to the Planning Commission, specifically as it relates to that being part of this larger ordinance with 3 other recommendations, and it being connected to a deliverable that is set in a commerce grant that's funding implementation of the Housing Action Plan. But I mean, certainly any request for a staff to go further refine code, we will follow up on that and do more work on code that needs more work. So.
If I could answer that and just add to what Evan said there. Both commenters did recommend that it get sent back to staff. But I also note that both commenters wanted essentially diametrically opposed things added to the next draft that comes before you. In other words, they're working on, from slightly different sides of the equation is the first thing I'd say. So if it were sent back to staff, there would likely need to be some sort of direction as to which direction staff should be working. The second thing is just to further flesh out the time crunch that exists here. We have a commerce grant that specifies a date by which we must complete these code amendments. And that date is, we're coming quite up hard against that date. If we want to get paid and do what we were supposed to do under the grant, we have very limited time to do that. There is some opportunity potentially, if Commerce agrees, to change the deliverable schedule, but that's not something we can guarantee. So if it is delayed substantially in any way, it's possible we could not get some of the funding, some or large portions of the funding in that grant. So that's the time crunch. It's not a, it's not a absolute hard, we can't do it after X date, but there are definitely significant financial implications potentially.
So how long have you known about the date that we needed to do this for the state? And how long have you been working on this?
That's unfortunately a question probably for Keith, who's been doing this directly. I know that if you know the answer to that.
I don't know specifically. I do know just generally speaking related to a lot of commerce grants. There's the work for commerce grants often can't start immediately. So the deadlines built into commerce grants are inherently difficult, but we didn't get the Heartland presentation wasn't until February. And so we couldn't really take action as far as drafting the code until there had been a recommendation from the Heartland study.
And if memory serves, I don't believe council authorized entering into the interagency agreement with Commerce with respect to the Happy Grant until early this year. I could be wrong about that, but that's my memory. So it's been a pretty limited time frame.
And how much is the Commerce grant?
I think I want to say 100,000, I believe. I can double check that. It was actually, that was brought to the same LUTC meeting as the Heartland presentation.
100,000 sounds about right.
Yeah, I think it was 100K.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to ask one question before you, Councilman.
Okay.
So if we have the date, and I'm maybe the one that's most vocal on this. I mean, we don't have to go all the way back to the Planning Commission. Can't we have this move a little bit so we can come up with some different numbers or different approach, or does it have to be?
Yeah, I do think that's possible. In particular, since we're holding a public hearing specifically at council, there's work that could be done between now and that public hearing if desired.
Yeah, but you never want to go to a public hearing unless you got it baked. I mean, yeah. Okay, Council President.
Well, I'm trying to understand, so the school district wants a cap, right? And I'm assuming that this is for a year, 1 year timeframe, 0 and cap for 1 year timeframe, correct?
I think from the initial fee that's adopted, that lasts for 1 year before the escalator can kick in. So.
And sorry, just to, I believe, clarify, and Sally, I'm sure as she listens to me talk, hopefully I'm saying what she said accurately, but what I heard the representative from the school district to say was that they would like an opportunity to exceed the cap for special situations where the development, I believe, triggers more than one, I can't remember the exact metric, but she would essentially like an exception to the cap, a way that the school district could go over the cap for imposition of impact fees. And of course, if I said that incorrectly, I'm sure she'll correct me, but that's what I heard the comment to be.
So, and that's fine, but I'm wondering if they need certainty, both ends need certainty, why can't we extend this for more than 1 year? Does it have to be a 1 year timeframe?
It does have to be a yearly, the school district needs to do their calculation each year by state law and how they're required to update their capital facilities plan, which is how their methodology pumps out the number, so to speak. So it does have to be on their end a yearly calculation.
Well, but we don't have to accept what they give us, correct?
Absolutely, yes,
So-
and each year.
So I don't understand why we can't just, because they both want certainty, and I understand that, And, you know, it's kind of like, for me, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. We have school districts that are consolidating because they don't have enough students. They don't know where the students went. We do have development coming in that will potentially provide more students, but we don't know how many. And so it's all a kind of, for me, it's in the future. And we don't know how long this future will be. So I'm wondering, can't we extend this from 1 year to a 2-year time frame?
So I think there are a couple ways of quote-unquote locking it in for a longer period of time. One of those ways would be to write into the ordinance, the cap for the years X through Y is something. That's one way of locking it in for a longer period of time. The suggestion that Mr. Morrison had is another way of locking it in that would be attractive to developers, which is to essentially say, once you bring your application in, you're locked into that amount.
Right. So can
yes.
you do a compromise between those
We could.
without going back to planning commission?
We could do that. It would definitely require some work on staff's part and some direction from council on exactly what they'd like us to do, but yes, that's absolutely possible.
Back to you, Chair.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Honda?
Oh, thank
You're
you.
next.
Thank you. So when a developer comes to the city with a plan for a multifamily development, they have the pre-meeting with you guys, and then it goes on from there. At what point are the fees paid for the school impact fee?
That's at the time of building permit. So if, not at the time of like the vesting of the application, application's completeness or anything. It's at the time of building permit. And that's the same for the TIF, the transportation impact fee. So that's consistent with that other impact fee that we've adopted.
So how long between when they come to you and when they get the building permit? Is that a year, 18 months?
Like from the initial land use application, I mean, that could be years, just because of how long, or it really depends on the project. Every project's different. But a small project, it can, if you're just talking about like a single family building permit, that doesn't require land use review, so that goes straight to a building permit. You're talking about something that requires like our lowest levels of site plan review, it can take a few months. For a larger multifamily project, it just depends on the level of complexity, and whether there's environmental critical areas involved, and so it can be many months, but some projects can take years for
And
for
at what
larger, more
point do the
complex ones.
developers want to have that impact fee?
At the point they bring in their application initially, that's when they are locked in to whatever the impact fee is at that time. That's what I understood Mr. Morrison and the comment letters to say.
Okay, thanks.
Go ahead, Councilmember Walsh.
A couple of questions. One is if the impact fee, or if the impact fee were set at the time of application rather than time of permitting, if we just change the ordinance that way, is this throwing stuff clear back to the planning commission, or could that be just done before it was presented to council next time?
I think that specific proposal would be a relatively limited proposal that we could draft and modify the ordinance and then have the public hearing on it before council, and it would not need to go back to planning commission.
Okay. Secondly, the amount of the fees. I mean, I definitely like the idea of a cap, and I think that Jack's concern is that if we put a number on the cap, that's kind of giving an indication that that's what we will do, which I don't think is necessarily the case. But I like the idea of a cap. But this 4,300 for single family and 6,300 for multifamily, how was that number arrived at?
That's based on a multi-year average. I believe it was a 20-year average. So we have an average of past school impact fees, both for single and multifamily. So it's based on a long-term average.
Is that in Federal Way or the whole region?
I believe that's for Federal Way, because
Which would be skewed because we've been so high for so dang long.
My question is if we, how long have we had that 20,000 or whatever?
the 20,000, and just looking at the year, like 2018 for multifamily, 20,043. So, and then it went down to 19 in 2019, and then it went back up to 20,000 in 2020. So that was.
I mean, it seems like those numbers have been exorbitant and kind of as skewed that average. If we took those out, I mean, it seems like we'd have a much more realistic average to start with, if that makes sense. So, and then my other thing, I mean, eventually, I mean, the school district is going to come back and ask for impact fees. I mean, I think that this year was an aberration, but they're eventually going to come back and ask for impact fees. One thing that I'm wondering, can the council, and I'm trying to figure out the right way to put this, from our constituents that have talked to me, a lot of the constituents have a major challenge with the lack of transparency in the school district and with the school board. And it seems to me as if it's in the interest of the city that the school address that lack of transparency, and that when the time comes that they do come back to us for an impact fee, that we're able to say, hey, if you want us to give you an impact fee, your lack of transparency is impacting our residents. And this isn't directed to you, this is directed more towards the other council members, I think. But your lack of transparency is impacting the residents of the city, and we're not very inclined to grant that impact fee if you're not addressing this lack of transparency. And I don't know, those are kind of my thoughts and my feelings that are going through this right now. And so anyway, I don't know what anybody else's thoughts are on that.
I did just want to add, since you asked about what it's based on, I will go back and double check. My understanding was it was based on a 20-year average, but I do want to double check if that took out any of like the outlier years. I don't know if it accounted for the extremes or not within that 20 years. So
a couple of questions I have. I would make sure that when we look at this impact fee, this is per door, correct?
It's per unit.
Per unit, a unit of 100 apartments is only 6,000, or is it 100 times 6,000?
It would, well, if there's 100, if there's 100 apartment units, it would be.
It's per door then, I mean, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, there's a specific definition for dwelling unit in our code, so it's based on dwelling unit.
Okay, so just a comment that I have on this. We're starting the shot, we're shooting ourselves on August 24th if we put these numbers in like this, because somebody's going to come back and say, we need impact fees, and they're going to be, you said 4,314, and you said 6,500, and all of a sudden those are the numbers we're going to see, and in my opinion, we're going to kill what we've been working so hard to get going in our downtown here to get development. So if I'm going to vote on this at all, it's got to be something that says, okay, we're going to be at $1,000 or $1,500 or some reasonable number, if there's a reasonable number, and you have predictability that says for the next 5 years, this is what it looks like, and then it could ratchet up, and then it could ratchet up. But just to put the number in here, this is, in my opinion, just a bad way to start what we've just changed.
Are you asking for like a 5-year period without even the escalator on whatever the initial?
Well, again, 0 from 0 is 0. But I mean, there should be some reasonable stair-step approach. But if you go to this number from start after where we've been, we just started the stair steps up again to where it's unreasonable. And I honestly, personally believe that there will be less impact in the schools in market rent, 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom places downtown that are going to be in houses in Twin Lakes or Marine Hills or the Ridge or wherever the land is, because it's two different types of families, in my opinion. But first of all, I think they're reversed on the price, and I think they're starting out way too high.
Chair?
Yes, Councilmember Trump.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to ask the representative from the builders. So let's say council passed something that said at the time that you make the application to build X number of units, by this date, I'll just pick up the day. Let's say August 15th, my birthday, okay? Of 2023 until August 15 of 2024, that 1 year window, once you make the application, your impact fee is gonna be 0. Will that give you enough time for your business long-term plan?
Great question, Councilmember. I would say it's moving in the right direction. It's necessary, but it's not sufficient. As Evan mentioned, and for the 2 projects that I mentioned, the Mill Creek and the Intercorp one was the one that you did a development agreement for on First Avenue South, the old Valley site. That's about 150 townhome units. That one, they did not ask for impact fee, school impact fee waivers in that because we understand the politics of asking for that in a development agreement. That project is moving through its land use permits right now, is going well with staff. But to get the land use permits for that and then the corresponding building permits for that, it's I think would be a challenge, and I'm looking to the excellent staff here. It's still a challenge to get that in 1 year to get through the land use permits and the building permits. The Mill Creek project is a 350 units on approximately on 320th, just outside, just on the east of I-5. That project is still in its pre-application process, has critical areas, so that one would unlikely be able to achieve both land use permits and building permits in 2 years. The variation of the theme, if I may, council members, is what our offer was, or suggestion was, vesting as to the land use application date. I think there might be a variation of the thing getting to what your council member is saying is, if you're vested to the school impact fees, and I want to be very clear, we're only talking about school impact fees. We are not asking to touch transportation impact fees in this context. That's already sort of set, is if your land use application comes in, you're vested to the school impact fees as of that date, provided, subject to a reasonable tail, you pull your building permits, which is the time that impact fees are typically issued, within a reasonable amount of time. Probably longer than 1 year, but maybe 2 or 3, depending on sort of, we could work with staff on that. The goal would then be to align the city and the development community's interest of predictably up the front, but making sure that the building permits actually get issued and you get the housing at the end of the process. Does that make sense, council members?
Thank you.
Brian?
Chair Dovey Committee, I can't make a motion, but I recommend that you table this until the next meeting, during which time staff meets with you individually in any setting, maybe even the downtown ad hoc committee, to discuss this further so we can get a better sense of where you want to go. There's been a couple of suggestions just kind of thrown out there that make sense initially, but would have much deeper impacts to the city that I think we need to discuss this more. So that's my
I have 2 questions before.
You have your
Informal motion.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
So, one of my questions is, and I like that idea, though. I like having a discussion. But if, if let's say the school impact fees were $2,000 for multifamily per unit. And so their application fee comes in, they accept that fee, and then when they get their permit, it's decreased. Would they then be able to have the decreased school impact fees?
That would depend on how the language was specifically written. And depending on how it was specifically written, it could come out either way.
Okay. And then my second question is on the retail space. So for what we heard in the downtown ad hoc committee was that it's really difficult to get that retail space filled. And so for the existing buildings that might have empty retail space, or the ones that are being built right now that are under the zone, the codes now, could they have their retail space requirements reduced?
Well, if they're already there, then I think it depends on the situation. But like if we're talking about a new use that's being established in a new use that's being established in an existing building, that would be subject to, if you're using an existing building and establishing a new use in that building, I believe that it would be, if this code was adopted, it would be subject to that reduced ground floor retail requirement. If you're talking about existing buildings that have vacant retail space, but there's no land use application to subject them to the updated code, then I don't know if there's anything that would change their current situation.
And the short version of that answer is it depends.
It all depends, doesn't it? All right, thank you.
Councilmember Walsh, do you have a
Yeah,
idea?
actually, I would just like to make a motion that we table it as per Brian's recommendation, and until our next meeting, so that we can consult.
Good.
Will that, with the time frames that we're talking about, with having to get this taken care of, would that impact that too much?
I think that should work.
Yeah, and your availability will assist that as well. We'll do our best to fit your schedules so that we can have those discussions.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much for the presentation.
And Evan, great job. I think this is one of your first major presentations for here in council chamber, and you did a great job, so.
Okay, we'll move to item E, TC3 letter of intent.
Okay, Chair Dovey, members of the committee and council. I'm filling in for Keith today, who's at the National Planning Conference. This is the proposed before you is a letter of intent to award to start negotiations with One Trent for the development of the TC3 property. The process thus far here on the slide. We met earlier in 2022 to get some conceptual ideas down, and with the help of Council President Kochmar and Deputy Mayor Honda and I think Councilmember Walsh, we selected VIA to help us out with those concepts, and they provided started to get the creative thinking flowing for the property, which helped out tremendously on moving the concept forward. The council then authorized, excuse me, authorized us to send out an RFP for development proposals, which we received earlier this year. And then Council Member Walsh, Chair Dovey, and Deputy Mayor Honda helped us with the selection of One Trent for that next step in the process. So, excuse me. If you award this tonight, then we'll begin negotiations for a development agreement with One Trent for a proposal that we expect to submit to the council before the end of the year. These are just some quick concepts that were brought forward by the One Trent development team. Again, this is not by any means a final, what it's going to look like, but it gives us a vision for what potentially could be for the property. This is the Performing Arts Center here at the lower left, Pete Von Reichbauer Way, and 3/16 with the parking garage to the bottom right here. The yellows are residential. This blue is office. This centerpiece here is a market and open space. And again, these are these are concepts at this point. Certainly not fully vetted, but just again to help us get an understanding of what the potential of the property is. Here it is looking at another sketch of what it could look like. This is effectively looking at the present day, from the present day roof of the PAC, looking east of what it could look like with the open space there and the market and the just gathering space there with residential and ground floor active spaces as well. And then this is another ground floor, excuse me, ground floor view of a concept. So it's the recommendation of the mayor to approve the letter of recommendation, to approve execution of the letter of intent to award and to start negotiations for a development agreement. So again, to clarify what this does and doesn't do, you're basically authorizing us to begin the negotiations for an agreement for development of the property. So it doesn't then lock in any of these proposals that you've seen. We'll come back to the council once we have the development agreement negotiated, and certainly keep the council apprised of any environmental approvals or permit approvals that we receive, so that you and the public can be aware of the progress that the property is making along the way. And we are excited to move forward. This is another small step of many in development of the TC3 property. So happy to answer any questions. And by the way, here in the audience tonight is Matt Rowe from VIA, and then representatives from One Trent as well, if you have any questions from them.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff for the work that they put into this. And I'm excited that we're moving forward. It's been a while, and it's time that we move forward. I know that I've heard from a number of people who don't like to see multifamily being built on the site, but once again, this is moving forward. We'll see what we can come up with and what works best for the site. And if we do nothing, we do nothing, and it stays the way it is, but we need to take this step and move forward.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, I would like to also thank the staff also. I mean, I think the staff's done a terrific job. I want to thank One Trent for a great, a great beginning proposal. And like Deputy Mayor Honda said, there's been getting feedback from the residents that they're concerned about more multifamily. But after talking to them and them seeing what the other options may be, they think that, hey, this may be a pretty good idea. And so, anyway, and personally, I think it's a great idea. So I'm all for entering into the work with the development agreement.
Lydia, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. Thank you for the presentation. And I too wanted to chime in because when we were at the NLC conference, I attended one of the workshops where there were several cities who have actually incorporated public market into their new city hall. And it was part of, they used the main floor, what we're calling a gathering place as place for this activity to happen. So I was very fascinated by what I heard. And so as we move forward, hopefully that could be something we would consider. And if necessary, staff can talk to staff of those cities. One was Lenexa, Kansas. I forgot where the second city was that is also considering implementing this and making the public market part of the gathering space inside the building, inside their new city hall, I'm sorry. So just a recommendation or a suggestion of something I had heard. Thank you so much.
If I may, I might tag on to what Lydia just said. We sat down with 2 senators and 1 congressperson and talked about getting funding for a public market of 40 to 50,000 square feet. So I just want to make that a public not that it's an announcement that we're doing it, but so at least everybody hears what Lydia's talking about, because I was in those meetings, we were all in those meetings, and we kind of set the stage that way.
We also talked about a senior center.
And a senior center.
I don't want,
so.
I don't want a lot of emails tonight.
But
We talked about a senior center
I'm excited
also.
to vote on this so you can get moving ahead. So thank you.
Yeah, just seeking funding from our representatives from the federal government. We'll see what happens.
We asked for $4 million from the federal government for the farmers market, including $200,000 for small business childcare owners that could be incorporated into the same area. So that would be, not to mention $200,000 for some EV charging stations.
Okay, is there a motion?
Chair Dovey,
Yes.
I move to forward option 1 to the April 18, 2023 business agenda for approval.
And I second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We'll now move to item F, which is 21st Avenue South 320th signalization and pedestrian improvements. All right.
Good evening. I'm Ken Smith with the Public Works Department. I'm here for the 21st and 320th signalization and pedestrian improvements authorization to add. There we go. So a little background. This is the 21st and 320th intersection just north of the Commons Mall, west of I-5, east of Pack Highway. The design includes pedestrian crossings with an island, protected island in the center, with new signalization to go along with it. As far as expenditures, we have a total of $1.7 million estimated for design, right-of-way construction, contingency and construction management and inspection, and 1.7 in funding. Here are the options considered. The mayor recommends option 1, and I'll answer any questions.
Any questions, council? Okay, seeing none, is there a motion?
I move to forward option 1 to the April 18, 2023 City Council consent agenda for approval.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right.
You get to stay up there and do
I get to stay
authorization
up.
to accept a conservation futures tax levy grant.
Yes. So again, Ken Smith with the Public Works Department. This is to authorization to accept conservation futures tax levy grant funding. We applied for the funds last year. There we go. And just a little background to get back to it. This is for 3 properties within the West Hylebos wetlands. On the left is the 3 properties in question we're looking to get the funding for purchase, and on the right is all the other conservation properties nearby. The grant is for up to $1.5 million with a $1.5 million match. That $1.5 million match was already budgeted out of the SWIM CIP 304 fund through the current 2023-24 approved budget. At the time, all 3 properties estimated around $2.5 million, so that's variable depending on, the climate right now. So up to $3 million that we may have to purchase property. As far as options considered, the mayor recommends option 1 for accepting the grant funding, and I'll answer any questions.
Councilmember Walsh?
Now, can you just go back to the map again?
Sure.
Just want to get a better look at it.
So 3 parcels, 2 adjacent to Pacific Highway, 1 just north of 356th Street.
And so that would be right there next to the Blueberry Farm Park?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And then the
other 2 are vacant right now. If you drive along Pacific Highway, you can see it's basically where there's a giant open area. As you start to go down south of 356th on the left, it's partially developed at one point with some grading, but it's sat empty for a while.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Honda?
So is this the land that the fire department owns?
One of them, that parcel next to the Blueberry Farm, yes.
Okay. So I support doing this, but at what point are we going to start to develop it to get the path and the trails through there and make it accessible for people to use?
It should be in the next few years is the start of the process. We haven't figured out who will be
Pay for it?
running that design yet, as far as if the city's going to do it or if we're going to do a consultant, but it is within our SWIM CIP.
So we have the money to do it
Yes,
in the swim,
correct.
and we're going to wait a few years to do it, even though we have the money?
I believe it's budgeted in the, to come in that, I think it's 2025 timeframe.
So we don't have cash on hand to do it today. It's budgeted, so every year as part of, as council's very well aware, as part of the tax bills, the SWIM gets a portion of that money So the funding that is like 25 through 27 is slated to build that trail, but it's not money we have in hand today, but that is within the CIP budgeted, that when that revenue comes in, it would go towards this project.
So then 25 to 27, it would be built? Or it's
I
designed and
believe
built afterwards?
25, 26 is design, 27, 28 is construction, off the top of my head, without double checking. But yeah, I think construction is slightly later than that, but it's like AKA 27. But yes, it's fully programmed out in the CIP too.
Okay, good to know. I'm excited for that to happen. Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
What kind of, I mean, now that, that Sound Transit is looking at going down Pack Highway, what kind of impact may that have on these parcels?
It may require, if they need to acquire some of that, some of the parcels that are conservation property, that they release some of the portions of conditions based on those parcels for sections of them. It depends on where they go. If they are in the middle of Pack Highway, then they may not have any impact at all. It's up to where their final design is.
Let's hope they don't want any of them.
Yeah. If they do take them, would they take a portion of it? Would they be needing to replace it with other properties in that area for us?
Potentially is the short answer. So there are several different categories of properties through there. There's properties that the city has purchased over the last 20 years using just swim money, in which case the swim utility could, if it was a desire of the council, the swim utility could just accept cash payment for those. There's also some, like the ones we're talking about tonight, that have CFT funding or other grant funding associated with them, where that's not so simple, that they would potentially either need to mitigate them and or pay back grant agencies on top of the fair market value. And then there's kind of a third category, which is mostly on the west side of Pack Highway, basically right across from the red triangle on the screen, where the city, as part of the purchase of the property, either purchased previously encumbered properties or encumbered the properties further when we purchased them with either the Army Corps, Ecology, US EPA, or 3 different tribes. So Sound Transit would be responsible for clearing all of those encumbrances, which may look like a number of different things. Replacement is one of those options. So we've shared all of that with Sound Transit and said, go do your homework. And they're working on that currently.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Chair Rovey, I move approval of the proposed acceptance of the Conservation Futures Tax Levy Grant.
I second the motion.
Sorry,
Oh.
I read the wrong line.
oh.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that
Here we
was
go.
the
Take
consent
two.
agenda. yeah.
Take 2.
I move to forward the proposed acceptance of the Conservation Futures Tax Levy Grant to the April 18, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
And I second that motion.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're talking about Dish Wireless LLC site lease, Lakota Park.
Good evening from a different microphone. So I'm here tonight to present the Dish Wireless site lease agreement for Lakota Park. Essentially, Dish Wireless is seeking to lease a portion of property located at Lakota Park to allow for installation and operation of certain equipment for use in connection with its wireless communication services. The equipment will be installed on a pre-existing light pole. And actually, though I don't have a picture of it in this slide presentation, I'm going to briefly pull up Google Maps so you guys can orient yourselves to where this is at the end. The revenue to the city would be $3,500 per month with an annual increase of 4%. There's no cost to the city. And this agreement is substantially similar to other site lease agreements that are currently in effect with other companies. We do that, we try to maintain uniformity for each company so that no one company gets any advantage over another with respect to these site leases. Options are to forward the proposed site lease to the consent agenda for approval or do not forward the proposed site lease agreement and provide direction to staff. And I'll briefly pull up, if I could.
While you're pulling it up, I'm just going to comment that, I wish I had a utility pole in my backyard that they wanted for $3,500 a month.
It's not too late.
Your neighbors might not like it.
And so the specific utility pole that we're talking about is right here on the corner. They're intending to put just another set of equipment, essentially just a little bit higher than the existing equipment on this pole that you can see. That's just in this western location in Lakota Park. And that's all I have.
Yeah, see any questions? Seeing none, do I have a motion?
I move to forward the proposed Dish Wireless LLC site lease agreement to the April 18, 2023 consent agenda for approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, Mr. Perez, 376 road study findings.
Good evening. Yes, let's see if I can get mine up there. And, oh, that is what I want. Okay, then. Okay, I was actually able to find this correctly. So, with that, where are we? Okay, yeah, I'm not used to using that one. There we go. All right. So, at long last, we have the 376 analysis. So this became a thing as a result of the Milton Road rezone in 2018, which prompted concerns from the Regency Wood neighborhood regarding the 376 extension. The concerns were that it would increase cut-through traffic through Regency Woods, encourage speeding, reduce safety, especially by the community park, which is right down here on the north side of 376th in Regency Woods, and increase crime. So as a result of those comments, council requested analysis of the feasibility of not extending 376th. So Regency Woods was developed under King County codes and standards, and 376 was stubbed to their west property line in that process. Their street network is not in conformance with city code and standards. In particular, we have higher design speeds on the collector streets. Both 19th and 375th have a design speed of 35. We would do it at 25. There are more lots than would be allowed under city code on a single access point. And King County has no block perimeter requirements, which are intended to make neighborhoods more permeable. And the county also allows very long cul-de-sacs, which we try to limit to also encourage connectivity. So the city's comprehensive plan has shown this connection since 1995 with the adoption of the first comp plan. So in the area of the Milton Road rezone, we have a proposed plat, Alder Village, and this is what it looks like right now. If we were to extend 376 straight across, it would go across some wetlands, which has been a bone of contention. And so this plat configuration avoids or minimizes the impact to the wetland buffer areas by having the street immediately turn to the north, and then there's 3 different ways to connect to Milton Road. So that also provides a more circuitous route with some sharp turns that has some advantages to addressing those concerns. So we use the city's on-call traffic consultant, the Transpo Group, which evaluated these various characteristics. And so the conclusions of that study were that they're forecasting a change of 150 vehicles per hour in the evening peak, assuming 376 was connected. Now that drops to 60 when you get north of 369th on 19th. And so what that means is there's about 90 vehicles per hour that would be using that connection specifically because it provides a new route choice, not necessarily generating more traffic. And we also looked at the possibility of having a different street connection, which would be using some, a tract that was set aside for shared driveway. And if we tried to connect that instead, it didn't significantly alter this forecast. One of the concerns being cut-through traffic by trucks. Currently, less than 1% of the traffic is large vehicles. 2/3 of that is expected to go away as Bridgepoint is developed on the Lloyd Pitt site to the south. That development is proposed that they have about 2/3 of their market area would be Port of Tacoma. And so that's why they're willing to spend a fair amount of money rebuilding Fifth Avenue in Milton to allow trucks to be using it, and constructing a roundabout at Porter and Fifth, and then adding a turn lane at Porter and Pack Highway. So with that, 2/3 of the truck traffic would head south instead of north. And so as a result of these two things, both the circuitous route and the Bridgepoint development, that 2/3 of that traffic would go away, and that would discourage those larger vehicles from cutting through the neighborhood. So as I mentioned, 19th Way has a 35-mile-an-hour, it's designed for 35 miles per hour. And therefore, it's not too surprising that not very many people follow the 25 speed limit. It would be appropriate to consider traffic calming measures on that roadway. So that could mitigate the concerns about speeding for both the existing and the potential new traffic that would come. That is, to give you an idea, we normally start looking at implementing traffic calming when the speeds get up above, it depends on the roadway, but 27 to 30 miles per hour. The 85th percentile here was 39. So significant amount of speeding going on there. With respect to roadway safety, collision history is minimal and almost non-existent within Regency Woods. No fatal or pedestrian or bicycle collisions were reported in the last 5 years in that neighborhood. And we do not expect that to change. So one of the potential advantages of making the connection is that emergency response times would be slightly improved with the 376 extension, but the other advantage is that it provides a second access if the quickest way in and out would be blocked in some event, like trees falling on the road. Travel times between the two would be improved by 60% compared to using the existing roadway network. It was determined that the intersection at Milton Road and 376 will need an improvement to maintain the city's level service standard, whether or not that connection is made. The consultant recommended a mini roundabout. There were no other intersections that would not operate within the city's level service standard. So basically, it's not changing any need to construct additional roadway improvements. So with respect to the concerns about safety around the Regency Woods Community Park. The consultant did propose using fencing to limit exposure for kids running out into the street. Our recommendation would be to make sure that whatever fencing is used does not obscure visibility around the roadway curve immediately to the west of the park. With the roadway curve being proposed with a 50-foot radius, that reduces vehicle speeds to less than 20 miles per hour, so speeding in front of the park should not be a concern. Now, the study didn't explicitly address this, but we've dealt with the issue in the past for years about people wanting to be on a cul-de-sac because they consider it safer. And our past research has indicated that no consensus whatsoever. Some studies show that it does provide a safety benefit. Other studies show that it actually increases crime to be having limited to one access. So at this point, we can't address it any further than that. To be more explicit about the extent of existing deficiencies in meeting code requirements, our code requirement for block perimeter, how long it takes to walk or drive around the block, is half a mile. Currently, it's 5.1 miles. And with that extension, it would be reduced to 1.2. So significant improvement, still not perfect. We limit cul-de-sacs to 600 feet. Currently, we have one that's 1,360 feet. Everything south of that 375th and 19th intersection goes as far as 1,360, almost a little over a quarter mile. With the extension, that one cul-de-sac would be limited to 890 feet, so improvement there. Finally, we also have a code requirement limiting the maximum number of homes to 25 off of a single access point. And currently, it's 43, and with the extension, it would be reduced to 22. So that would bring it within code. So the big question, is there a particular reason to not provide that street connection at 376? And there was not a compelling reason. So the impacts that were identified, negative impacts to Regency Woods, are all capable of being mitigated. However, failing to provide that street reinforces existing deficiencies and impinges on the ability to provide that in the future in accordance with adopted code and comprehensive plan policies intended to improve emergency access and neighborhood connectivity. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. Thanks for presenting this study. Has this been presented to the neighborhood?
It is not yet.
Is there a time to do that?
We could certainly do that, but I haven't set one up yet.
Okay, I would like that done. And I'd like to know when it is, if possible. I might like to attend it if I could. Can you go back to the map showing where the road will be?
This one?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you.
So, yeah, the lower right is where the stub of 376 goes into Regency Woods.
Okay, so where is, on this map, where is Enchanted Village at? Or Wild Waves?
Yeah, that's further to the north.
Okay.
So.
So it's not on the map?
No, it's beyond these limits.
Okay. And is Alder Village in the city limits of Federal Way?
It is. That's part of the Milton Road rezone that was done.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Walsh?
Yeah, basically, Councilor Deputy Mayor Honda asked the questions that I was going to ask. I mean, I think it needs to be presented to the neighborhood, and I'd like to also know when that would be. Looking at the map, I'm right now looking at Google right here, And in that lower bottom right-hand corner there is the park, just right, you know, where that continuation arrow is?
Yep.
Is that the park right there?
Yeah, it's on the north side of
Okay.
the street there.
All right, and so it would be going, okay, so that's where you say there'd be the 90-degree corner there,
Yes.
and going up through it, okay. All right, yeah. Yeah, I think it's critical that, you know, there's been an outcry in the neighborhood, as you well know, and I think it's critical that this be presented to the neighborhood. And hopefully it mitigates some of their concerns. But anyway, thank you.
Have permits been pulled on this plot? Have permits been pulled on this plot?
So, yes, that is in the preliminary plat process. We're waiting for the next submittal responding to our comments.
So, so when do you estimate that this will start to build? Is there
I don't
any
know if I'm
timeline?
qualified to make that estimate.
Within a year? Or,
If they were to respond right away, they could probably turn dirt next year, would
Next
be
year.
my guess.
so with this stub, I'll call it a stub, can they build this project without it?
So they would not be coming anywhere close to meeting that block perimeter requirement. So that
So the answer is no.
it would revert to that 5.1 miles as opposed to 1.2.
Okay. I get it. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I do have one more.
one more.
Did the neighborhood know that this was on the agenda tonight? I expected to see some folks here, that's why.
Yeah, I don't
I mean,
know. They haven't been notified.
Okay,
there
thank you.
would, everybody knows it's on the agenda if you go on the website and look at what our agenda is.
Right, but they might
Specifically, if
not
we
have.
probably haven't mailed anything to anybody that said it was on the agenda.
They're not going to be looking.
Right.
Right.
I mean, this has been going on for a number of years, and so, okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Going to send them, because they're not really organized over there, they do talk. So are you going to send them a letter then and invite them to a meeting, or what do you think? you should?
I'm not sure exactly what the best way, but certainly we could send a letter, or we could just contact the HOA and set up something with them. The HOAs have been active there.
Yeah, EJ?
I was gonna say, we'll work with our outreach staff and figure out what the best method is. I mean, there's a couple different options the city has available to it, so we'll figure out what makes the most sense with this neighborhood.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Smith, you're going to update us about the light rail's going to be up in a year or something? I was at a meeting today, and I got to tell you a little story about this. The guy says, I want to get on light rail. I live in Tacoma, and I don't understand why it's not here now. And I said, hey, I'm going to have a briefing.
Yeah. All right, good evening again. All right, so I'm here for the Sound Transit activities updates for the City of Federal Way. Okay, so for everything north of 317th Street, still continuing on drainage, landscaping, plinths, noise wall construction, system duct bank, ballast installation, MSC wall construction. They're doing some more rail delivery and installation and welding, and they're continuing work on their 288th crossing and Military Road crossings, as well as doing some foundation and footing work for the traction power substations. I believe they're working on one of the two, or one of the three, I should say. For the city center, phase closure of 23rd Avenue South continues, which limits traffic on 23rd Avenue South to a single northbound lane between 320th and 317th. The first phase is still continuing to go through July. They're working on some additional utility crossings at 23rd Avenue, which I believe are expected to begin this week, which includes water, storm, and communications crossings. I think the water is scheduled to start this week. Station work ongoing with exterior framing, plumbing, electrical, and mechanical work. And construction of the garage is ongoing with additional deck and column pours happening every few weeks. And construction of the end-of-line facility is also ongoing. As far as the operations and maintenance facility south, Sound Transit is working with federal agencies to determine permitting and environmental impacts, and right now working with Federal Transit Administration for their National Environmental Policy Act, EIS. They're expected to update their schedule once they know more based on the impacts to including this EIS in their NEPA documentation. So once they have that, I will let you know. As far as Tacoma Dome Link extension, it's Hayden. On Thursday, March 23rd, the Sound Transit Board approved the study of the additional alternative for the South Federal Way Station through Milton, along with additional station options for the station in Fife. They compiled the results of their recent Fife and South Federal Way public engagement with a couple of key findings. There was a lot of concern from participants about residential and commercial property impacts, as well as displacements related to the new route along Pacific Highway. The participants were pretty split on a preference for the station for the South Federal Way station location, and many participants had concerns over a delay to the project schedule. It looks like they received around 110 or more attendees to the 3 drop-in sessions they did, with about 85 comments and questions, and around 2,150 visitors for their online open house. The full summary you can find on the Sound Transit's website. That's under the TDLE extension under the documents section. So, and I'll answer any questions.
Deputy Mayor Honda?
Thank you. I have 3 questions. One, the art installation, do we know anything more? Has the artist come up with a final design yet? Might be too early.
No, I still do not have any more info than the initial design. I'm waiting to hear
Okay.
back.
And the traffic revisions due to the construction, it's so odd to see buses coming down PVR way.
Uh-huh.
Have there been any issues or concerns with businesses or the folks that live in the senior housing? I know they had a concern anyway with getting in and out of their garage before this.
I think I've had one citizen request about the buses coming out onto 20th Avenue and then turning onto 316th. And we raised that up to King County Metro and see if they've had any issues. And as far as they were able to get back to us, was that they were not having issues with their turning and not having issues with getting in and out so far. So.
Okay. Is the parking garage, the current parking garage, is that fully opened?
Yes.
The other day, I was, a couple weeks ago, I guess, I was driving along, I think it's right next to that, where it's being built, the little road. And there were cars parked out along the side of the road like we used to park before COVID, when there wasn't enough parking in the garage. So I hadn't seen that for a while, and I was just curious if we've closed down a floor of the parking garage or if it's full and people are using transit.
Yeah, essentially it's still operating as it has been. There's just the one entrance on the 20th side or the 21st side that's closed. So the entrance on 23rd is still open. So.
Okay. And then my final question is, has Sound Transit moved on their surplus property? Have they advertised it to developers? Are they talking to the city? What are they doing on their surplus property?
Yeah, they're getting close to, I think, putting out, I believe it's an RFQ for their market study to determine, it's similar to the TC3 market study. So we shared our TC3 info with Sound Transit about, and some of our input that we got. So they're doing the same thing. They're pretty close in that regard. I think that's their next step.
So they'll do the market study for a few months?
Correct. And then they'll come back and likely pursue the same avenue that we did with the TC3 property.
Okay. Thank you.
I see no more questions, so thank you very much for your presentation. Next thing is item 4. Anybody have anything else they'd like to bring up? I do have one thing. I want to know when is the information on the parks, what do I want to call it, access fees, or is that somewhere, where's that in our agenda planning? Park impact fee, excuse me.
I wish Evan were still here since he's the one who's kind of the keeper of the exact schedule. It's coming up quite soon, though.
Quite soon.
I've been seeing drafts for review in legal, which usually means it's nearing the finish line.
Because one suggestion I have, we had a discussion about school impact fees. It'd be nice to kind of have those two different things kind of come together so we can assess the whole picture instead of just the schools, because it's something that we need to discuss. They play together. Okay? Other than that, we will adjourn. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you. Good night.